You're going to drink coffee tomorrow morning, but after what you're about to see here, you'll never look at that cup the same way again. 5 diseases, one drink, and data that most doctors still don't discuss in their appointments. I'll get straight to the point. The heart is the first organ to benefit, and the way this happens is completely different from what most people imagine. For decades, doctors warned that coffee was bad for the heart because of the temporary rise in blood pressure right after consumption. That's real, but incomplete. What those early studies ignored was the long-term cumulative effect of the polyphenols in coffee on the vascular endothelium, which is the inner lining of your arteries. Chlorogenic acid, a compound abundant in coffee, reduces the oxidation of LDL cholesterol. This matters because cholesterol itself is not the villain of the cardiac story. The villain is oxidized cholesterol, the kind that sticks to artery walls and forms atherosclerotic plaques. No oxidation, no plaque. No plaque, no heart attack. A study published in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology with more than 400,000 participants showed that regular coffee drinkers had a significantly lower risk of developing heart failure over 10 years. It wasn't a small effect, it was an expressive reduction observed across multiple populations, in different countries, with different dietary patterns. And there's more. Coffee has a systemic anti-inflammatory effect that acts directly on the coronary arteries. Chronic low-grade inflammation is the state that precedes most cardiac events, and the bioactive compounds in coffee interrupt this inflammatory cycle in a way that very few substances can. It doesn't dilate the heart, it doesn't increase pumping force, it acts before all that, at the root in the vascular environment that determines whether a heart attack will or will not happen. Now tell me in the comments, what state are you from? I want to know where the people watching this are coming from. The relationship between coffee and diabetes is one that science has taken decades to fully understand, and the reason is paradoxical. Caffeine on its own impairs insulin sensitivity in the short term, but coffee as a complete beverage, with all its compounds, reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes consistently across virtually every study done over the last 3 decades. This led researchers at the Harvard School of Public Health to a fascinating discovery. The benefits of coffee on glucose metabolism don't come from caffeine. They come from other compounds, especially chlorogenic acid and trigonelline, which improve the way muscle cells absorb glucose from the blood independently of insulin. In plain terms, these compounds open an alternative door for glucose to enter the cells, a door that doesn't depend on the hormone that's malfunctioning in people with insulin resistance. Studies with decaffeinated coffee show results comparable to regular coffee in diabetes prevention. This completely destroys the narrative that the benefit comes from caffeine. What is protecting the pancreas, preserving the beta cells, and improving metabolic signaling are the polyphenols, which are present in any variation of coffee with or without caffeine. There's also an effect on the gut microbiome that is only beginning to be documented. Coffee feeds specific bacterial species in the intestine that produce short-chain fatty acids, and these acids have a direct protective effect on glucose metabolism. The gut and the pancreas are in constant communication, and coffee participates in that conversation in a way that no isolated supplement can replicate. This is the part that surprises people the most, because it goes against the narrative that many still carry that hot beverages cause cancer. Temperature can be a risk factor when consumed to extremes, but the compounds in coffee act in a direction completely opposite to carcinogenesis. The liver is the most documented organ. Coffee reduces the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma, the most common type of primary liver cancer, by a proportion ranging between 40% and 50% in large-scale studies. The mechanism involves the reduction of hepatic fibrosis, the modulation of enzymes that activate carcinogenic substances in the liver, and the reduction of inflammatory markers that precede malignant cellular transformation. But the liver isn't the only one. There is solid evidence for colorectal cancer, and the mechanism here is different. Coffee accelerates intestinal transit, reducing the contact time between potentially mutagenic substances and the mucosa of the large intestine. The less time a carcinogenic agent stays in contact with the cells of the intestinal wall, the lower the chance of DNA damage. For oral and pharyngeal cancer, Meta-analyses show that regular consumers have considerably lower risk. For endometrial cancer, for non-melanoma skin cancer, the data is consistent. Coffee is not a cure for cancer. Nobody is saying that. But it modifies the biochemical environment of your body in a way that makes malignant cellular transformation less likely. What very few people know is that coffee contains melanoidins, compounds formed during the roasting process that have antioxidant activity superior to many vegetables frequently celebrated for that same benefit. These melanoidins bind to heavy metals in the intestine and reduce the absorption of pro-oxidant substances. It's a protective mechanism that happens before any compound even enters the bloodstream. Leave a comment telling me how many cups you drink per day. I want to see the reality of who is here. The relationship between coffee and mental health goes far beyond the alertness that everyone already knows about. And I need to be clear from the start. I'm talking about clinical mental health, about major depression, about diagnosed anxiety, not passing mood. Cohort studies with more than 200,000 participants show that regular coffee drinkers have a 20% to 30% lower risk of developing clinical depression over their lifetime. And even more relevant, the risk of suicide in populations that regularly consume coffee is consistently lower in long-term epidemiological studies. This is not a small result. This is a clinically expressive effect of a drink that most people consume without thinking. The mechanism is not simply caffeine blocking adenosine receptors and producing alertness. It's more sophisticated. Caffeine modulates dopamine receptors, making the cells of the brain's reward system more responsive to this neurotransmitter. In practical terms, this means that the same everyday experiences produce a greater sense of well-being in regular coffee drinkers than in non-drinkers. The polyphenols in coffee cross the blood-brain barrier and reduce neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation, inflammation inside the brain, is today recognized as one of the main biological substrates of depression. Not the only cause, but a central factor. Treating depression without addressing neuroinflammation is like trying to drain a pool without turning off the faucet. Coffee also stimulates the production of BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This compound acts literally like a fertilizer for neurons, promoting the growth of new connections, protecting nerve cells against oxidative stress, and improving brain plasticity. Low levels of BDNF are associated with depression, mental exhaustion, and a range of psychiatric conditions. Coffee raises these levels in a measurable way. We've reached the discovery that impresses me most in all the scientific literature on coffee. And I need you to pay close attention here, especially if you are over 50 or have someone close to you who is aging. Alzheimer's doesn't begin when memory fails. It begins decades earlier with the silent accumulation of two proteins, beta amyloid and phosphorylated tau. These proteins form plaques and tangles in brain tissue long before any symptom appears. By the time symptoms emerge, the damage is already extensive, which is why no current treatment can reverse the disease, only slightly slow its progression. What coffee does is act in that silent phase, before the diagnosis, before the forgetfulness, before any clinical sign. Chlorogenic acid and other polyphenols in coffee reduce the production of beta amyloid in the brain and accelerate its removal through the glymphatic system, which is the brain's cleaning system that operates mainly during sleep. This dual action, reducing production and accelerating removal, is what sets coffee apart from any pharmacological intervention available today. A Finnish study followed more than 1,400 people for 21 years and found that those who consumed 3 to 5 cups per day in middle age had 65% less risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia in old age. 65%. That is a number that no approved Alzheimer's medication has come close to producing in terms of prevention. Caffeine also blocks adenosine receptors in the brain in a way that reduces neuroinflammation and inhibits the excessive activation of microglial cells, which are the immune cells of the central nervous system. When these cells become chronically activated, they begin to destroy healthy synapses along with the damaged ones. Coffee modulates this process and protects the neural connections that sustain memory and reasoning. For Parkinson's disease, the data is equally impressive. Men who regularly consume coffee have a 40% to 60% lower risk of developing the disease. In women who do not undergo hormone replacement therapy, the protective effect is similar. The mechanism involves the protection of dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra of the brain, exactly the group of cells that degenerates in Parkinson's. And here is the detail that almost nobody mentions. This protection appears to be dose-dependent up to a point. It's not that more is always better, but the minimum consumption for a documented neuroprotective effect in the studies is consistently at least 2 cups per day. 1 cup a day may not be enough for the most expressive neurological effects. If you are over 60 or getting close, write in the comments. Have you ever thought that the coffee you drink every day might be your greatest ally against Alzheimer's? I want to read your answers. There is a reason why entire civilizations, across centuries, built rituals around coffee. It wasn't about the drink itself. It was about what that drink did to the body and the mind. The effects that science today documents with high-precision instruments were perceived intuitively by populations that had no laboratory, only the accumulated experience of generations. What modern science did was look inside coffee and find a library of bioactive compounds that interact with virtually every system in the body: cardiovascular, metabolic, immune, neurological, hormonal. None of these compounds acts in isolation. It is the synergy between them that produces effects that no supplement can reproduce in a capsule. Coffee is not a magic solution for anything. Someone who smokes, doesn't sleep, doesn't move, and lives under chronic stress is not going to undo that damage by drinking coffee. But for those who take care of their health, who pay attention to what they eat, who respect their sleep, who stay active, coffee is a health accelerator that very few natural substances can match. The question is not whether you should drink coffee. The question is whether you are drinking it in a way that maximizes the benefits, or whether you are neutralizing those effects with sugar and combinations that turn one of the most studied substances in history into a dessert. Think about it. You drink coffee every day, for years, maybe decades. That habit you never stop to analyze may have been, silently, one of the greatest protectors of your health all along. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching this from. And if you know someone over 60 who drinks coffee every day and still doesn't know everything this drink is doing for their brain, share this video right now. It may be the most important health information that person will receive about brain health and aging.